Settle in, you're listening to Restful Historian. Our focus this evening rests on the story of what it was like to visit a medieval tavern. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position. Perhaps dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise. And let's ease into tonight's story together. The sun, a molten coin, begins its slow descent, bleeding colors across the western sky. Soft mauves, bruised purples, and streaks of fading gold. You feel the day's labor, or perhaps the long road, settle into your bones like a familiar ache. Dust from the track still clings to your clothes, carrying the faint, earthy scent of the countryside you're leaving behind, a memory of miles trod or fields turned. As you trudge the last stretch towards the town, the air itself seems to sigh, growing cooler, carrying on its breath the first hints of evening dew. The rough-hewn stone of the town walls looms larger, with each weary step, their silhouette a stark, protective line against the deepening twilight. These aren't always the gleaming ramparts of legend, but often a practical, patched-up affair. It's not a grand, shining city from a minstrel's song, but a place of timber, wattle, and daub, smelling faintly of wood smoke, livestock, and something less definable, something uniquely lived in. Listen closely. Beneath the whisper of the evening breeze, through the tall grasses bordering the path, another sound emerges, growing from a subtle vibration in the air to a discernible tapestry of noise. It's a low, indistinct hum at first, the collective murmur of many lives packed closely together. A sound quite unlike the quiet of the open road. Perhaps you can pick out the distant, rhythmic clang of a blacksmith, reluctant to end his day, or the bleating of sheep being herded into pens for the night. It's the sound of a community, a welcome thrum after the solitude of travel or the quiet toil of the fields, promising shelter, and perhaps, just perhaps, a tankard of ale to wash away the dust. That rhythmic, determined clang from the blacksmith's forge, which earlier punctuated the town's industrious hum, now begins to falter. Each strike grows a little less frequent, a touch more weary, until a final resonant thwack rings out, hanging in the cooling air before dissolving into a profound quiet from that corner of the town. The air itself, still carrying the ghost of metallic heat and the faint, sharp scent of quenched iron, seems to sigh as the day's clamor releases its grip. Other workshop noises, the rhythmic thud of the fuller's mill, the rasp of the carpenter's saw, the clatter of the weaver's loom, they too fall silent, one by one, like tired giants finally succumbing to slumber. As these familiar sounds of labor recede, a different tapestry of noise gently weaves itself into the twilight. A low, intimate murmur begins to drift from the timber-framed houses, spilling from open doorways and the unglazed, shuttered windows. These are the sounds of lives lived beyond the anvil and the loom, the quiet cadence of families gathering, perhaps the hushed tones of shared confidences, or the fragmented lilt of a half-remembered song. Further off, a dog barks, a sudden sharp interruption in the growing stillness, a lonely sound quickly absorbed by the darkening sky. Then, inevitably from the stone heart of the town, the church bell tolls. Its deep, bronze voice resonates through the narrow streets, each chime a solemn marker of time passing, a call to vespers for the devout, or for many simply a profound signal that the arduous working day is truly, finally, done. With these gentle, encroaching sounds of evening, a quiet expectation begins to settle over you, a subtle shift in your own being. The dust of the road, or the deep ache in your muscles from a day spent in the fields, feels perhaps a little heavier now, more insistent. Yet, countering this weariness is a growing, almost palpable sense of anticipation. It's a yearning for simple comforts, the solid feel of a wooden bench beneath you, the warm, flickering dance of candlelight on rough-hewn walls, and the promise of something cool and wet to soothe a parched throat. The day is folding in upon itself, and somewhere nearby, the tavern's humble, inviting glow will soon be a welcome beacon against the encroaching dark. And so, as that darkness truly begins to settle, Your gaze instinctively scans the darkening street, or perhaps the edge of a quieter, less trodden path. Your eyes, weary from the day, search for it. That familiar, hopeful landmark. It might be a thick wooden panel, roughly hewn, perhaps creaking softly as it hangs above a sturdy doorway. On its surface, a symbol sometimes boldly painted with pigments ground from earth and minerals, or deeply, lovingly carved into the very grain of the timber. Imagine a fierce boar's head, its tusks rendered with a surprising touch of artistry, or a cheerful, if slightly faded, bunch of grapes, each orb distinct, swinging almost imperceptibly in the evening air. Perhaps it's a swan, its neck elegantly curved, or a simple, recognizable ale stake, a long pole adorned with a bush, an ancient marker of hospitality. These weren't just random decorations. They were vital, telling you this was a place of rest, a public house offering ale, and perhaps, if you were particularly fortunate, a simple, hot meal. Illuminated by the very last sliver of daylight painting the western sky with soft, bruised colors, or, more likely now, by the unsteady, smoky dance of a single torch bracketed to the wall, the sign stands out. Its colors, perhaps a deep, earthy red, a muted forest green, or the dark, polished sheen of aged wood, seem richer, more profoundly inviting against the deepening gloom. It's more than just an image. It's a beacon, a silent promise whispered on the cool, damp air, a promise of tangible warmth seeping from within, the low, reassuring hum of human company, and a moment to let the weight of the world, or at least the dust of the road, fall gently from your shoulders. And as you draw a little closer, that promised hum begins to resolve itself into distinct notes, like individual threads becoming clear in a tapestry of sound. The first to reach your ears, carried on the cool caress of the evening air, is a sudden hearty burst of laughter. Not raucous, not unsettling, but genuine, a ripple of shared mirth that has just landed perfectly. It's a surprisingly warm sound, cutting through the quiet of the approaching night, a punctuation mark in the general murmur. Soon after, a sharper, clearer percussion joins it, the distinct clink of pottery, or perhaps the duller thud of heavy wooden tankards, striking together. A toast, maybe, or simply the enthusiastic setting down of a drink after a long, satisfying pull. These are the small, sharp sounds of release, of simple pleasures enjoyed in fleeting moments stolen from a harder day. Then, almost a whisper at first, you might catch the faint, reedy strains of a simple tune, nothing grand, no complex harmonies performed by skilled minstrels. More likely, it's a lone, slightly wobbly pipe, or the tentative plucking of a lute's strings, a melody woven artlessly through the chatter. It's a tune that might be familiar from countless other hearthsides. Or perhaps it's new, yet still imbued with that timeless, comforting quality, like an old friend humming quietly in the corner. These are the inviting whispers of conviviality, the sounds that speak of shelter found, of company kept, a gentle invitation to step out of the darkness and into a circle of flickering light and shared breath. The music, such as it is, and the low murmur of voices draw you closer. And as you approach the rough-hewn doorway, another sense takes precedence. Before your eyes can fully adjust to the dim interior, your nose tells you much of what you need to know. The air here is thick, a palpable tapestry woven from the very essence of medieval life, a scent that speaks volumes before a single word is uttered from within. First, there's the smoke. Not the acrid, choking kind from a poorly managed blaze that stings the eyes, but the reassuring, almost sweet fragrance of a well-tended hearth. It's the scent of seasoned oak or perhaps beechwood, burning steadily, its invisible tendrils carrying the profound promise of warmth to chase away the damp chill that clings to your clothes. This is a primal comfort, a deep, smoky reassurance that speaks directly to the soul, whispering of safety found. Mingled with this is the undeniable perfume of ale. It's an earthy, slightly sticky sweetness, the ghost of countless tankards perhaps overfilled, or overturned in moments of boisterous conviviality, or even just simple clumsiness. It's the smell of malt and hops, a yeasty tang that has seeped into the wooden floorboards, into the very timbers of the place, a constant fragrant testament to the tavern's primary purpose, to offer a brief golden escape from the day's unending toil. And then, if fortune smiles upon this particular evening, another, richer note might drift through, the unmistakable, deeply savory aroma of roasting meat. Perhaps a joint of pork, or even a string of sausages, is turning slowly on a spit somewhere within, its precious fats hissing and dripping onto the glowing embers below. This isn't an everyday scent for most, but a luxurious promise, a hint of a feast, or at least, something far more substantial than watery pottage. It's a smell that makes the stomach clench, just a little, in anticipation. Together, these scents, the comforting wood smoke, the sweet-sour spill of ale, the tantalizing whisper of roasting meat, create an olfactory signature unique to such havens. It's an aroma that clearly announces shelter is here, sustenance can be found, a fragrant beacon in a world that often offered precious little of either. It's the smell of temporary refuge, of human warmth, however rough and ready it might be, beckoning you to finally step across the threshold. So you reach out, your hand perhaps a little grimy from the road, and grasp the rough-hewn wood of the tavern door. It's a substantial thing, this barrier between the growing chill of the evening and the promised warmth within. With a push, it groans on protesting iron hinges, a sound that seems to echo the weariness of a long day for many who seek solace here. The last slivers of bruised twilight, clinging to the world outside, are instantly devoured as you step over the worn threshold. Inside, it's a different world. Your eyes, accustomed to the fading light, take a moment to adjust, blinking against the sudden change. The air is thick, almost tangible, a warm, smoky embrace tinged with the heady scent of spilled ale, and something vaguely, hopefully, edible. A dull, flickering orange glow emanates from a large hearth at one end, its flames casting dancing, elongated shadows that writhe across the low-beamed ceiling and the rough-plastered walls. Perhaps a few tallow candles, sputtering precariously on scarred wooden tables, add their meager, smoky light to the scene, revealing glimpses of faces already ruddy from drink or the fire's heat. And the sound, oh, the sound. It washes over you, a sudden engulfing wave after the relative quiet of the approaching night, the low murmur of many conversations, a tapestry woven from coarse jokes, tired complaints, and perhaps a whispered rumor, all punctuated by a sudden bark of laughter or a gruff, emphatic statement. The rhythmic clink of wooden or pewter tankards meeting, the scrape of a stool on the packed earth or rough-boarded floor. It's a human chorus, robust and unrefined, the soundtrack to this fleeting escape from the day's toils and the encroaching darkness. Stepping further inside, away from the last vestiges of twilight, your eyes begin a slow, reluctant dance with the gloom. It's a different world in here, a world painted in shades of soot and shadow. The light doesn't so much illuminate as it does suggest shapes and movement. A flickering, uncertain welcome, stubby tallow candles, reeking faintly of rendered animal fat, sputter on rough-hewn tables, their greasy orange flames casting long, dancing shadows that writhe and leap on the timbered walls. Perhaps an oil lamp, its wick trimmed low to conserve precious fuel, adds its own smoky, resinous contribution to the dimness. If there's a central hearth, its embers might offer a more generous, pulsing glow, a sleepy orange beast painting the faces of those gathered closest with a warm, ruddy hue, but also silhouetting those further back into anonymity. And the air, oh, the air is a character in itself, heavy and close. You almost have to push your way through it. It's a potent, complex brew, the acrid bite of wood smoke clinging stubbornly to every surface, the sweet, cloying scent of spilled ale turning sticky on the floorboards, and the undeniable, musky aroma of unwashed bodies, pressed companionably close after a long day's labor. Add to that the sharp tang of stale sweat, the earthy redolence of damp wool cloaks, and perhaps, if the kitchen is active, the faint, savory promise of some bubbling, mysterious pottage from a back room. It's the unignorable perfume of medieval life. Unfiltered and unapologetic. A thick blanket woven from the day's efforts and nightly comforts. The hum of activity you heard from outside now has a visual counterpart. A shifting, restless sea of shoulders, elbows, and downturned heads. Faces half seen in the murky light, flickering into focus, and then receding again into the smoky haze. Somewhere amidst this dense air and the low thrum of voices, a figure might briefly detach from the general murk. Perhaps the tavern keeper, his apron stained with things best left unidentified. Don't expect a warm smile or a hearty greeting. A curt nod, barely perceptible, might be all the acknowledgement you receive, if any at all. His eyes, accustomed to the comings and goings of countless weary souls, might sweep over you with an appraising glance, more sizing you up than welcoming you in. More likely, in a tavern already heaving with life, you are simply another shadow slipping through the door, noticed by few and acknowledged by fewer. The other patrons, hunched over their wooden cups or rough-hewn trenchers, are largely engrossed in their own worlds. A few eyes, deep-set in weathered faces, might flick towards you, a momentary curiosity that vanishes as quickly as it appears. They are not hostile, not necessarily, but simply indifferent, wrapped in the solace of their ale and the brief respite from their day. Your task now is to navigate this human current, to find a sliver of space on a crowded bench, the wood worn smooth and dark by centuries of use, or a leaning spot against a damp stone wall. You might feel the brush of a coarse woolen sleeve, inhale the sharp scent of wood smoke clinging to someone's hair, as you gently insinuate yourself into the fabric of the room, becoming just another thread in its noisy breathing tapestry. You are not so much welcomed as absorbed, another drop merging into the murky convivial pool. And as your eyes adjust to the dimness, scanning the shifting forms and shadowed corners, they are inevitably drawn, aren't they? Pulled towards the brightest, most vital point in this whole murky tableau. There, across the room, often occupying a grand space of its own, is the hearth. Its flickering light casts long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, a golden, wavering beacon in the pervasive gloom. You feel its invitation even from a distance, a gentle promise of warmth that cuts through the tavern's general fug of damp wool, stale ale, and unwashed bodies. As you edge closer, perhaps excusing yourself past a gruff-looking carter reeking faintly of hay, or a woman hawking what might generously be called meat pies, the air around you begins to change. The damp chill clinging to your woolen cloak from the biting wind or persistent drizzle outside starts to recede, beaten back by a palpable wave of dry, comforting heat. You hear it now, more clearly, the steady, reassuring crackle and spit of burning logs, the occasional soft hiss as sap escapes the wood, a rustic symphony playing beneath the slurred songs and booming laughter. This isn't just a fire. It's the tavern's very soul, pulsing with a raw, elemental life. Imagine finally reaching that coveted circle of warmth. Perhaps you find a sliver of space on a rough-hewn bench, its surface polished smooth by countless weary travelers before you, or you simply stand, allowing the heat to toast your chilled hands and face. The flames, a restless dance of orange, yellow, and deep crimson, paint the faces of those gathered near with a warm, flickering glow, softening tired lines and illuminating fleeting expressions. A brief smile, a thoughtful gaze into the embers, a shared knowing glance. This radiating heat seeps into your very bones, a primal comfort that our ancestors understood intimately. In a world where the cold was a constant, often harsh companion, this generous blaze was more than just light against the encroaching darkness. It was a shield, a focal point for weary souls, a small, defiant sun against the chill of the medieval night. As your eyes adjust, moving away from the hypnotic dance of the fire, they begin to take in the rest of the room, revealed in that same unsteady, golden light. The furniture here speaks of utility, not luxury. Long, trestle tables stretch out before you, their surfaces a mosaic of countless spills, hurried knife marks from cutting bread or cheese, and the dark, ghostly rings left by innumerable tankards. Imagine running your hand across the thick planks. Perhaps a little uneven, the wood dense and cool beneath your touch, worn remarkably smooth in patches by centuries of sleeves and elbows, yet still capable of offering up a rogue splinter if you weren't careful. Beside these tables, simple backless wooden benches await. They are as robust and unpretentious as the tables themselves, hewn from solid timber, sometimes with surprisingly chunky legs, all built to endure the weight of boisterous drinkers and the occasional clumsy ale-fueled stumble. There's no padding here, no concession to comfort beyond what bare, often roughly finished, wood can offer after a long day's toil in the fields or at the forge. You might shift, trying to find a less unyielding spot, feeling the unvarnished, slightly coarse grain beneath you, a constant reminder of the tavern's humble nature. Each piece, from the stout legs of the tables, sometimes splayed for stability, to the wide, often thick seats of the benches, feels as though it were crafted with a pragmatic sigh, built to last generations, not to impress a fleeting visitor with delicate artistry. There's a rustic, almost brutally functional feel to everything. The air itself seems to cling to the wood, a faint, lingering aroma of old timber, stale ale, and perhaps a hint of sweat and ancient wood smoke, all trapped within the grain. There's a certain quiet dignity to these humble furnishings, a testament to the countless stories, both joyous and sorrowful, that have unfolded upon them. They are silent witnesses, these sturdy pieces, to the fleeting moments of respite found by so many, long since turned to dust. Now, let your gaze drift downwards past the heavy, scarred legs of the table to the very floor beneath your feet. You wouldn't find any polished flagstones here, no intricate mosaics to admire. In many such humble establishments, the floor would simply be the earth itself, packed down hard by generations of shuffling feet, the constant thud of tankards, and the occasional clumsy stumble of a patron a little too deep in their cups. This earthen floor, often cool and perhaps perpetually a little damp, especially near the bustling doorway, would be generously strewn with rushes, or perhaps straw. In slightly more upscale taverns, or those with a bit more timber to spare, you might find rough-hewn wooden planks, uneven and creaking gaps between them, offering glimpses of the dark earth beneath. Whichever it was, these fragrant coverings of rushes or straw weren't laid for comfort, not in the way we might imagine a soft rug today. Their purpose was far more practical, a somewhat aromatic, if ultimately doomed, sponge to absorb the inevitable spills of ale, the grease from a dropped morsel of fatty meat, and whatever else found its way down from the tables above, or was tracked in from the muddy lane outside. Think of it as a medieval paper towel, albeit one that stayed put for quite some time, growing richer with every passing day. The scent of these rushes, if freshly laid, might offer a brief, sweet, grassy note, a fleeting counterpoint to the damp earth, the stale beer, and a certain underlying, inescapable mustiness that spoke of generations of use. Imagine the soft, dry rustle and the slight crunch underfoot as you shift your weight, a constant, subtle soundtrack to the tavern's low hum, a sound as much a part of the place as the clinking of mugs, or the murmur of hushed and not-so-hushed conversations. As your feet settle on those rushes, and your ears grow accustomed to their gentle whisper, your eyes begin to adjust to the tavern's embrace. There are no bright, even lights here, no stark illuminations to chase away the night. Instead, the glow is often a flickering, living thing, cast by perhaps a few precious tallow candles, their weak flames sputtering bravely against the encroaching darkness. Or maybe a smoky oil lamp, its wick trimmed just so, offers a small circular pool of hesitant light on a nearby table. Notice how these modest sources fight a constant battle with the gloom, carving out small islands of visibility in a sea of shadow. Long, distorted figures dance on the rough-hewn wooden walls and across the low, beamed ceiling, mimicking the gestures of the patrons, stretching and shrinking with every flicker and every draft of air that slips through unseen cracks. A raised tankard becomes a monstrous silhouette. A leaned-in whisperer transforms into a conspiratorial phantom. Faces around you are rarely seen in their entirety. Instead, they are studies in chiaroscuro, a gleam of an eye here, the curve of a cheekbone there, the rest lost to the soft obscurity. The corners of the room remain stubbornly undefined, holding their secrets close, perhaps muffling the scrape of a bench or the soft thud of a dropped coin. You might find yourself wondering what or who lurks just beyond the reach of that hesitant candlelight. This interplay of light and shadow isn't just a practical reality of meager illumination. It's the very soul of the tavern's atmosphere. It lends an intimacy, certainly, cocooning small groups in their own little worlds of dim light and hushed conversation. But it also weaves a thread of mystery, perhaps even a faint, thrilling sense of the unknown, into the very fabric of the evening. Every shared glance, every rumor exchanged, feels a little more significant in this softly shadowed space. And as your eyes adjust to this dance of light and darkness, your ears begin to tune into the tavern's unique symphony. It's not a deafening roar, not usually. Instead, imagine a rich tapestry of sound, woven from countless human threads, each one telling a small part of the evening's story, a murmur that seems to rise from the very earth floor beneath your feet. There's the constant, gentle hum of conversations, rising and falling like a slow, uneven tide. Listen closely, and you might pick out different textures within that hum. The low, earnest tones of merchants discussing prices that seem to climb as relentlessly as the nearby hills. Perhaps the slightly slurred cadence of a farmer recounting his day's backbreaking toil in the muddy fields, or the hushed, conspiratorial whispers of gossip being shared. Secrets passed, like illicit coins under the table. Each table, each small gathering becomes a little island of voices in the larger sea of sound. Occasionally, a louder note will pierce through this background murmur. A sudden, unrestrained laugh might erupt from a shadowy corner, infectious and wonderfully real, a brief moment of pure, unadulterated joy cutting through the weariness. Or perhaps a sharp exclamation, a friendly argument over a game of dice, or a disputed point of local lore, punctuated by the solid thud of a fist on a wooden table. Not in anger, necessarily, but for emphasis, for the sheer boisterousness of shared company. Then there's the clatter, the more percussive elements of this medieval orchestra. The rhythmic thunk of heavy wooden tankards, often sticky with spilled ale, or the slightly sharper, more resonant ring of pewter mugs, being set down with a satisfying lack of delicacy. The scrape of a heavy bench on the uneven, perhaps dirt-trodden floorboards as someone makes room for a newcomer, a sound that speaks of welcome, or at least of shared space in a crowded world. It's a profoundly human soundscape, this. The air isn't filled with the precise, impersonal clicks and whirs we might associate with more modern gatherings, but with the raw, unfiltered sounds of people simply being. Sharing stories, sharing ale, sharing a brief respite from a world that was often relentlessly harsh. This chorus of life, though boisterous at times, rarely feels overwhelming. It's more like a comforting blanket of sound wrapping around you, a reminder that even in the dimmest light and amidst the rough-hewn timbers, you are not entirely alone. And as that tapestry of sound settles around you, a gentle companion to the murmur of voices and the clinking of tankards, another layer of the tavern's reality begins to make itself known. It's carried on the same currents of air that ferry the laughter and the low, earnest conversations, the complex scent of the place itself. Beyond the sharp, almost comforting tang of wood smoke, which clings like a second skin to every rafter and rushes-strewn floor from the ever-burning hearth, and the sweet, yeasty breath of spilled ale soaking deep into the grain of rough wooden tables, other, more intimate aromas begin to emerge. You might catch the undeniable earthy scent of unwashed bodies, a close, human musk that speaks not of neglect, but of long days filled with labor and the simple reality of limited access to plentiful, warm water. Damp wool, too, has its own particular fragrance, a heavy, slightly lanolin-tinged and musty aroma, rising from the cloaks and tunics of your fellow patrons, still carrying the chill of the outside air. Then there's the food. Perhaps a simple, bubbling pottage of beans and root vegetables simmering slowly, its humble steam adding a subtly savory note to the air, or, if fortune truly smiles upon the establishment, the distant, tantalizing hint of meat slowly roasting over an open flame. And, woven through it all, especially if the tavern nestles close to the stables or a muddy, well-trodden thoroughfare. You might detect the faint, unmistakably animal scent of old straw, horses, and perhaps even a pig or two snuffling nearby. This isn't a modern, sanitized air, scrubbed clean of life, but a rich, complex, and deeply authentic perfume of its time, telling its own quiet, unfiltered story of daily existence. It's the smell of a world made of earth, wood, and sweat, a world pressing in close. Breathing in that complex, earthy perfume we spoke of, you might now push open the heavy wooden door. Its groan is less a complaint, more a familiar sigh of welcome, a sound ingrained in the memory of this establishment, echoing the countless entries and exits it has witnessed over the years. The wood itself, worn smooth by countless hands, might feel cool and slightly damp under your own. Inside, the air is thick with the murmur of voices, the clinking of pewter or wooden tankards, and the smoky haze from the central hearth, or a few precious sputtering candles. Light is a scarce commodity, painting the room in shifting shadows and warm, fleeting highlights. This isn't a place for quiet solitude, not in the way we might seek it today. Instead, imagine it as a flowing current of shared existence, a hub where the town's many threads briefly intertwine. Observe the faces around you, illuminated by the flickering light. At one long, scarred trestle table, a merchant, perhaps distinguished by the slightly better dye of his tunic or the glint of a silver buckle, might be earnestly negotiating with a farmer whose weathered hands speak of toil in the fields. Nearby, a group of local artisans, their conversation punctuated by easy laughter, could be recounting the day's small triumphs and frustrations, their voices a low rumble beneath the higher-pitched notes of a traveling peddler hawking his wares, or the occasional reedy tune from a minstrel tucked into a dim corner. Privacy, as we might cherish it, is a rare and perhaps even suspect concept here. You'd share your bench, your table, and inevitably, the proximity of your neighbors' conversations, their boasts, their sorrows, their whispered secrets not quite secret enough. There's an undeniable closeness, a forced community, yet within it, a certain raw honesty. The distinctions of the outside world, while not entirely erased, the innkeeper still knows who can pay for the better ale, and deference is often shown through small gestures, are softened by the shared need for warmth, sustenance, and a brief respite from life's burdens. This constant, gentle thrum of humanity, the sheer lack of personal space, forged a unique social tapestry. Here, for a few hours, under the watchful, smoky gaze of the rafters, the lines blurred just enough for stories to be exchanged, for news to travel, and for the lonely to feel a fleeting sense of connection, however rough-hewn the setting. It was life, lived out loud, in the comforting if crowded embrace of the medieval tavern. And amidst this comforting, if crowded embrace, your gaze eventually settles on the heart of this little world, the taverner, or perhaps it's an alewife, her face ruddy from the heat of the hearth and the constant demanding motion. You might see her, a woman of sturdy build, her sleeves pushed up to her elbows revealing strong forearms, hands perpetually busy. She could be wrestling a heavy wooden tap into a fresh cask, the satisfying thud as it seats, the dark, sweetish scent of new ale briefly cutting through the general fug of wood smoke, damp wool, and unwashed bodies. Or maybe she's wiping down the scarred, sticky wooden counter with a damp, grayish cloth, her expression one of weary patience as she listens to a patron's slurred complaint, her lips moving in a brief, almost silent reply. Her eyes, though, are sharp, constantly scanning the room. They miss little. A tankard nearly empty, a hand straying too close to another's purse, a dispute beginning to simmer in a dark corner, the soft clink of a coin offered for payment. She might not smile often, her face etched with the lines of long hours and the precariousness of small profits, but there's an undeniable, often unspoken, authority in her presence. A quick, sharp word from her, or even just a pointed stare, can quell a rising argument far more effectively than any brawny patron could. She is the anchor of this swirling, noisy place, the steady hand that, for a few precious, well-worn coppers, provides a measure of solace in a harsh world. The ale she pours might be thin, the bread a bit stale, but her establishment, under her watchful gaze, offers a haven, however imperfect and fleeting. Beyond her, the heavy wooden door groans open, letting in a momentary gust of damp evening air and the muted sounds of the world outside. With it come new arrivals, perhaps a pair of merchants or a lone pilgrim, their faces etched with the grime and exhaustion of the road. You might notice the way their shoulders slump, the relief almost palpable as they cross the threshold from the uncertain gloom outside into the flickering, smoky warmth within. Their cloaks, once perhaps of vibrant hue, are now dulled by dust and stained by rain, bearing the map of their travels in every crease and smudge. Mud clings stubbornly to their worn leather boots, a testament to miles of trudging along rutted, unforgiving tracks. Their eyes, often red-rimmed and shadowed, scan the crowded room, not necessarily with suspicion, but with a deep, bone-weary longing for a simple stool, a cup of something warm, and a moment's quiet before the dawn calls them back to their relentless, often perilous journey. They don't seek boisterous revelry, not these weary souls. Their conversation, if they speak at all, is low and sparse, perhaps a quiet murmur exchanged over a shared cup, punctuated by the soft clink of pewter or wood set down on a rough-hewn table. You might hear the long, slow sigh that escapes as they finally unburden themselves of a heavy pack, its straps having dug into their shoulders for countless hours. They are, for a short while, ghosts of the road, briefly materialized in the amber firelight, seeking nothing more than a fleeting taste of comfort, a small island of peace in the vast ocean of medieval travel. The tavern, for them, is less a place of loud celebration and more a necessary pause, a breath held before plunging back into the unknown. Beyond the weary travelers, the tavern hums with a different kind of life, a rhythm more settled and familiar. Cast your gaze towards the shadowed corners, where the locals gather, their forms softened by the flickering candlelight. You'll see faces etched by sun and wind, hands calloused and strong from the plow, the loom, or the hammer. A farmer, perhaps, his rough-spun tunic still carrying the faint, earthy scent of the fields, leans back, his voice a low rumble, as he shares a story with a neighbor, perhaps about a stubborn ox, the paltry price of grain, or a rumor whispered from the next village over. Nearby, a weaver, threads perhaps still clinging to her simple kirtle, might be quietly recounting a piece of local tattle, her eyes crinkling at the corners, as she speaks of a minor scandal or a surprising kindness. Their laughter, when it comes, isn't the boisterous roar of a grand feast, but a warm, shared sound that seems to soak into the smoky air, mingling with the smell of stale ale and damp wool. These are the quiet sounds of release, after a day of hard, often unyielding, labor. For them, this dimly lit room, with its rough benches and chipped cups, isn't just a place to drink. It's a vital thread in the fabric of their often harsh lives, the only reliable place where the day's burdens can be momentarily set aside, where news, both trivial and vital, from the birth of a calf to the moods of the local reeve, is exchanged like precious currency. It's their parliament, their news sheet, and their theater, all rolled into one smoky, ale-scented haven, a brief respite before the dawn brings the toil anew. And in this smoky haven, amongst the boisterous regulars, you might find quieter currents of conversation, whispers that carry the scent of distant lands and ventures. See, over there, tucked into a less raucous corner, perhaps a merchant. His cloak, though travel-stained, is of a finer wool than most here, and beside his tankard, maybe a small, tightly bound ledger rests. He speaks in hushed, earnest tones, not of village gossip or the latest harvest predictions, but of wool prices in distant Flanders, or the perilous sea routes to the Levant. His words, understood by only a select few, paint fleeting pictures of bustling foreign ports, of ships laden with spice, shimmering silk, or dark rich wine. A world of profit and considerable risk, far removed from the muddy fields just outside the tavern door. Or perhaps your ear catches the softer, more measured cadence of a pilgrim, their face etched with the sun and wind of a long and arduous journey. They might be resting their weary bones on their way to Canterbury, or even further afield, to Rome or the revered shrine of Santiago de Compostela in Spain. Their tales are not of commerce, but of enduring faith, of sacred relics glimpsed through reverent crowds, of the varied, sometimes bewildering, customs of folk in far-off shires or kingdoms. They might describe the awesome, humbling scale of a distant cathedral, its stained glass throwing jewels of light onto ancient stone, or the unexpected kindness of strangers who spoke no common tongue. Their quiet voice becomes a thread, connecting this small, smoky room to a vast, unseen tapestry of belief and human endeavor. These are the voices that gently weave the wider world into the warp and weft of local life. A quiet reminder that beyond the immediate horizon, countless other lives, other dreams, continue to unfold. And at the heart of this humble nexus, amidst the scent of wood smoke and damp wool, stands the host. More often than not, this pivotal figure was a woman, the alewife, her reputation built upon the quality of her brew. Imagine her, arms strong from hauling barrels and stirring mash, her apron perpetually dusted with barley flour, a faint, sweet aroma of fermenting grain clinging to her. The ale she served wasn't just a drink, it was her livelihood, her craft, perhaps even her legacy in this small community. Each batch would be unique, a subtle dance of malt and local water, sometimes spiced with groot, a secret blend of herbs before hops became commonplace. Each sip a taste of her particular skill. Alternatively, the host might be a sturdier man, his voice a low rumble that could cut through the din of a dozen conversations. His hands, calloused from tapping casks and perhaps breaking up the occasional scuffle, would rest confidently on the rough-hewn counter. Whether alewife or landlord, their role was far more than just serving drinks. They were confidants, news-gatherers, and, crucially, peacekeepers. A sharp word, a knowing glance, or sometimes the sheer force of their presence, was often all that stood between a lively evening and a brawl that could spill out into the muddy street. They were the steady hand, the watchful eye, utterly essential to the fragile social fabric of the tavern. Without them, it would be just a room, not a refuge, not a meeting place, simply a collection of individuals adrift, rather than a community, however temporary, gathered under one roof. And while the tavern keeper held the center, a commanding presence amidst the revelry, other, smaller figures wove through the dim light and the hazy air, thick with the scent of wood smoke and damp wool. These were the apprentices of this bustling, often chaotic establishment. The young hands learning the frequently thankless trade of hospitality in an age that offered few gentle beginnings. You might catch a glimpse of a girl, perhaps barely into her teens, her homespun apron already a canvas of ale stains and greasy smudges, as she deftly navigated the narrow gaps between crowded benches. Her movements would be quick, almost skittish, a blur as she refilled a heavy earthenware flagon or swiped at a fresh spill on a scarred wooden table with a coarse, damp cloth, her eyes often downcast, a silent portrait of hurried deference. Or perhaps a boy, his face streaked with soot from tending the ever-hungry hearth, or marked by the grime of the rushes strewn across the floor, would scuttle past. He'd be laden with a precarious stack of empty wooden trenchers, or perhaps a sloshing pail, his small feet pattering softly on the rough-hewn floorboards, a sound easily lost beneath the drone of conversation and laughter. These potboys and serving wenches were the almost invisible gears of the tavern's machinery. They moved with a practiced urgency born of necessity, always listening, always observing, absorbing the rhythms and demands of this public stage. Theirs was a world of constant fetching and carrying, of mumbled orders from patrons, and the occasional gruff word, rarely of praise. They were learning their place, learning to read the shifting moods of the crowd, to anticipate a need, to become adept at being present yet unnoticed, a crucial skill for survival, and indeed for their meager keep. But not every soul in this flickering, ale-scented space sought raucous company or the boisterous camaraderie of the common room. Look now, past the crowded trestle tables, towards the edges of the firelight, where the shadows dance a little deeper. There, perhaps in a less frequented alcove, or hunched over a roughly hewn table stained dark with countless spills, sits a solitary figure. Their cup, likely wooden or crude unglazed pottery, is nursed slowly, the contents Perhaps a thin, sour ale that bites the back of the throat, or a cloudy, weak wine, savored with a quiet intensity, or perhaps just endured. This wasn't always a sign of sorrow, though a weary traveler miles from home, or someone nursing a private grief, might well find a strange, muted comfort in the anonymous hum of the tavern. It could be a merchant, their mind still tallying accounts, the day's dealings replaying behind tired eyes. Or perhaps a craftsman, finding a moment's peace away from the clang and clatter of their workshop, the cool dampness of the stone walls, a welcome change from the heat of the forge, or the dust of the sawpit. Maybe even a scholar, or someone who simply preferred the murmur of distant voices to the stark silence of an empty room, their gaze drifting, taking in the small human dramas playing out before them. Imagine yourself for a moment in such a position. The air is thick with a complex tapestry of smells: wood smoke, stale beer, damp wool, and the faint underlying tang of unwashed humanity. Yet here, in this small pocket of relative quiet, there's a different kind of engagement. A chance to observe, to listen to the fragmented stories carried on the air like stray sparks from the fire, to feel the pulse of this small shared world without needing to be at its noisy, clamorous center. A moment of introspection, perhaps, found unexpectedly amidst the medieval thrum. The murmur of voices from a nearby table, its surface rough-hewn and scarred by countless tankards, draws your attention. It's a low, conspiratorial hum, the words often indistinct, like bees buzzing just out of reach, punctuated by the occasional gruff laugh or a thoughtful silence. You lean back, just a little, letting the sounds wash over you. Are they discussing the latest pronouncements from a local lord, perhaps a new tax on firewood, or the ever-present worry about the upcoming harvest? You might catch a snippet about the miller, suspected of short-changing his customers, his thumbs supposedly a little too heavy on the scales. The price of barley, a constant lament, threads through their words like a mournful song, accompanied by the dull clink of earthenware cups meeting the wood. Someone mentions a strange light seen over Blackwood Forest last Tuesday. A bad omen, surely, whispered with a hushed reverence for the unknown. Another voice, older, more weathered, dismisses it with a weary sigh, recalling similar tales from his youth that came to naught. Then, the conversation shifts, as it often does, to lands unseen. A traveler, perhaps, or someone who once knew one, speaks of distant cities paved with gold, or monstrous beasts said to roam the northern wastes. These are stories polished smooth by countless retellings, each layer adding a little more wonder, a little more fear. The truth of them matters less than the brief escape they offer from the damp chill seeping through the wattle and daub walls, and the mundane ache of a day's hard labor. As the echoes of far-off marvels and monstrous beasts begin to fade, your gaze might drift across the smoky, low-ceilinged room. You'd start to notice not just the individuals, but the subtle geography they form. Clusters of humanity huddling together for warmth, for company, or perhaps for safety. The air, thick with the smell of wood smoke, stale beer, and unwashed bodies, seems to press in around them, a tangible presence in the dim light. Over by the sputtering tallow candle, which casts long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, you might see a knot of familiar faces, perhaps men from the same village, their shoulders almost touching as they share a stained wooden bench. Their laughter, when it comes, is a comfortable, rumbling sound, distinct from the sharper, more guarded tones of the lone traveler nursing his ale near the doorway. His cloak, still damp from the evening mist, marks him as an outsider, observed more than engaged, a temporary fixture in this very local scene. And then there's the quiet deference, a silent language, understood by all within these walls. The innkeeper, a man of some local standing in this small world, might offer a slightly fuller measure or a cleaner, or at least less chipped cup to the local guildmaster, or to a stern-faced individual whose worn leather jerkin and the way he carries himself suggest he carries a sword for a living and knows its grim purpose. No grand pronouncements are needed. A subtle nod, a fractional shift in posture, the swift clearing of a space at a crowded table, all speak volumes of status and respect, earned or feared. There's an unwritten code here, as binding as any law, woven into the very fabric of the evening. You would learn quickly whose gaze to avoid, which boast to ignore, and what topics, like the fairness of the Lord's justice or the ever-present weight of tithes, are best left undisturbed like sleeping dogs. One wrong word, one unthinking gesture in this shared space, and the fragile peace bought with weak ale and fleeting company could curdle into something far less pleasant. It's a delicate balance, this impromptu community forged in the dim, flickering light, always teetering on the edge of shared laughter or a sudden, sharp dispute. Eventually, though, the primal need for refreshment, for something to wash down the dust of the day or the taste of fear, would stir within you. Forget any notion of a neatly printed menu, bound in leather or tacked to the wall. Such niceties are centuries away. Here, in the hazy glow of the tavern, your order is a far more personal, more immediate affair. You might try to catch the eye of the harried innkeeper, his apron stained with a history of spills, or perhaps a serving wench navigating the crowded floor with a precarious tray. More likely, you'd raise your voice just above the general murmur, hoping to be heard over a boisterous song or a heated debate about the price of wool. "Ho, goodman!" you might call, or simply, "Ale!" If words fail, or if the din is too great, you could make your way towards the source. A rough-hewn counter where barrels rest, their wooden sides damp with condensation, or a bubbling pot near the hearth, exuding a simple, savory aroma. There, a gesture, a pointed finger, a coin held forth would usually suffice. The choice, if you could call it that, would be starkly simple. What ale have they brewed today? Is there a pottage simmering, that thick, gloopy stew of whatever was on hand? You wouldn't be perusing a list of vintages or debating the merits of different roasts. It's a transaction stripped bare, a direct plea for sustenance in a world where little was guaranteed, not even the next cup. But what would fill that cup? More often than not, ale. Forget any notions of crystal clear, chilled refreshment, or the crisp bite of a modern lager. The ale of a medieval tavern was a different creature entirely, a humble, ubiquitous companion. Picture a brew poured from a communal cask, often cloudy, the color of weak, milky tea, or perhaps a dull, muddy amber. Sometimes, a visible sediment of yeast and fine-grained particles might swirl gently as it was handed to you, resting at the bottom of your rough-hewn wooden tankard or simple clay cup. It would be served at the temperature of the room, which, depending on the season and the fire's dwindling strength, could range from cellar cool to decidedly tepid. This wasn't a connoisseur's drink, chosen for its subtle notes or hoppy aroma. It was a cornerstone of daily life, a fundamental source of hydration and calories. The alcohol content was generally quite low, often weaker than many modern beers, meaning it could be consumed throughout the long day without too much incapacitation. A gentle hum rather than a heady buzz. More importantly, the brewing process itself, the necessary boiling of the water with the malted grains, rendered it significantly safer to drink than much of the water available. That local stream or communal well could be a murky gamble, a seemingly clear draught teeming with unseen dangers. So each slightly sour, perhaps faintly bready gulp was not just a moment's pause from labor, but a small, vital measure of safety, a liquid staple in a world where true cleanliness was an elusive luxury, and reliably pure water, a rare, precious blessing. Now, step inside, out of the mire of the street, and into the dim, smoky air of the tavern. The air itself is thick, a tapestry woven from wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present, faintly sweet, faintly sour aroma of spilled ale. Your thirst, born from that safer-than-water brew we just spoke of, now seeks a specific satisfaction. And here, at the rough-hewn counter, you'd likely find a choice, though perhaps not a vast one, by our modern standards. Before you, perhaps in simple wooden jacks or earthenware pitchers, would be the small ale. This was the everyday drink, the social lubricant, the thirst quencher that wouldn't cloud your wits too much after a long day's toil. Its taste? Think thin, a little watery perhaps, with just a hint of malt and hops. A far cry from the robust flavors we might expect today. It was often brownish, sometimes a little cloudy, and certainly not very strong. Sometimes so weak, in fact, that children would drink it as a safer alternative to that risky well water. It was hydration, with a whisper of something more. But then, for those with a few more pennies to rub together, or for a special occasion, a feast day, a wedding, or just a rare moment of indulgence, there was the strong ale. This was a different beast entirely. Darker, richer, with a more pronounced, warming kick from the alcohol. Its flavor would be deeper, more complex, perhaps with notes of caramel or toasted bread from the more generously used malt. This was the ale for storytelling, for laughter that echoed a little louder, for forgetting the chill in your bones or the ache in your back. It was a treat, a brief, heady escape, not an everyday comfort for most. The choice, then, wasn't just about taste, but about circumstance, about affordability, about the very rhythm of life. A simple distinction, yet one that spoke volumes about the daily realities and the occasional, precious joys of the medieval world. But beyond even the finest, strongest ale, another world of drink sometimes beckoned, particularly if you found yourself in a bustling port town, or a tavern frequented by merchants and the well-to-do. Here, a different liquid might be poured, not from a communal cask with a wooden spigot, but perhaps decanted with a little more ceremony from a dusty, amphora-like jug. This was wine, a rarer nectar, often embarked on long, precarious sea voyages from the sun-drenched vineyards of Gascony, or floated carefully down the Rhine. Such journeys, fraught with risk of spoilage or even piracy, naturally inflated its price, transforming it from simple refreshment into a clear, almost spoken statement. Imagine, for a moment, the hush, or perhaps the subtle shift in glances from other patrons, as you called for wine. It might arrive in a cup of cool pewter, a welcome sensation against your fingers after a long day, or if the establishment was truly grand, perhaps even a delicate greenish glass, a treasure in itself, easily broken. The color could be a pale, watery rose, a deeper, almost brooding claret, or even a white that was more of a warm, golden amber hue. Its taste, well, that could be a surprise. Perhaps surprisingly thin, even a little sharp to the tongue, or maybe warmed with spices to mask imperfections, or the lingering chill of a long, damp journey. It wasn't always the smooth, refined experience we might imagine today, but it was undeniably fine. The very act of ordering it, of paying that noticeably higher price, spoke of connections, of travel, of a life less tied to the muddy fields and more to the wider, wealthier currents of the world. Each sip was a taste of elsewhere, a fleeting mark of distinction in the dim, smoky air of the common tavern room. It was a luxury that whispered of distant sun and different soils, a small rebellion against the everyday, bought and savored one precious cup at a time. But wine, for all its acquired sophistication, wasn't the sole escape from the everyday tang of ale. Sometimes, if fortune truly smiled, or if the tavern keeper had a particular connection perhaps to a local apiary or a wandering merchant, you might encounter mead. Ah, mead, a drink with a lineage stretching back into the very mists of time, far older perhaps than many of the weathered stone walls that now formed the village. This wasn't the thin, often watery brew of the masses. This was fermented honey, a golden, sometimes almost syrupy liquid that promised a different kind of warmth, a different kind of story. Imagine it presented, maybe in a simple, well-worn wooden cup, its surface gleaming faintly in the flickering light of a tallow candle. The first scent to greet your senses wouldn't be of sharp hops or earthy malt, but a rich, almost heady floral sweetness, the very essence of 1,000 summer flowers captured and transformed. Each sip would coat your tongue, a wave of pure, potent honey, sometimes with subtle herbal undertones, sometimes with a surprising alcoholic kick that truly belied its gentle, inviting aroma. It offered such a profoundly different flavor profile to the common ale, a deep, resonant sweetness against ale's often bitter or sour notes. To find mead was to stumble upon a taste of something primal, something celebratory, a sweet, slightly dangerous nectar in a world that was often anything but. And that golden mead, or perhaps the more common cloudy ale, wouldn't arrive in a delicate, sparkling glass, not for most folk. Imagine, instead, the solid, reassuring weight of a wooden tankard in your hand, its surface smoothed by countless grips, perhaps still holding the faint, resinous scent of pine or the earthy tang of oak. Each imperfection a story of a previous night's revelry. Or maybe your drink is served in a traditional leather jack, a surprisingly pliable vessel, stitched with strong sinew, its interior likely coated with pitch to make it watertight. It might feel slightly sticky to the touch, still faintly warm from the previous drinker, a thought best not dwelled upon too deeply, and carry the faint animal scent of cured hide mingling with the ghost of stale beer. Then there were the rough pottery mugs, heavy and often crudely glazed, their surfaces uneven beneath your fingertips, a humble, earthy feel. Each one unique, perhaps with a small chip at the rim or a wobble to its base, a testament to its everyday, unglamorous life. In a finer establishment, one that perhaps catered to traveling merchants or a minor official, you might find pewter, cool to the touch, with a dull, silvery gleam in the dim, flickering light of tallow candles. It spoke of a little more coin, a little more status, though still far from true opulence. But glass? Glass was the stuff of dreams for most patrons of a common tavern. Exceedingly rare, incredibly fragile, and so breathtakingly costly it was more likely to be found locked away in a lord's coffer, or gracing the high table of a wealthy monastery, than on a rough-hewn tavern bench. To even glimpse its shimmer, to imagine holding its delicate thinness, would have been a quiet wonder, a glimpse into a world of almost unimaginable refinement amidst the robust, earthy reality of the evening. That earthy reality certainly extended to what filled the cups. Almost always ale, for water was often suspect, and wine a luxury for wealthier tables. So picture this. You're finally settling down, the day's labor, or perhaps the long road, behind you. Your cup, likely made of rough-hewn wood, sturdy leather, or perhaps chipped earthenware, is filled. You lift it, the aroma reaching you even before the first taste. Not of crisp hops, but something altogether different, something wilder. This isn't the chilled, filtered beverage many of us know today. Oh no. Medieval ale was often a living, breathing concoction, served at whatever temperature the room happened to be, frequently cloudy with yeast and sediment. The first sip might indeed surprise your modern palate. There's a distinct earthiness, perhaps a gentle, lingering sourness that speaks of its robust, unfiltered nature. Instead of that familiar hoppy bitterness, you might detect a curious, almost herbal tang. This was often Groot ale, a brew seasoned with a local, sometimes secret, blend of botanicals. Perhaps bog myrtle for its resinous scent, yarrow for a subtle bitterness, or even wild rosemary, adding a whisper of the forest. Each mouthful would be a unique experience, sometimes slightly sweet, sometimes more savory, a far cry from the standardized pints of later centuries. It was thicker, more substantial, often considered a food as much as a drink, providing vital calories. This was the genuine taste of the medieval era, a cloudy, complex, and deeply traditional brew, warming from the inside out, a liquid echo of the land and its seasons. Holding that cup, you'd be tasting something ancient, something fundamentally real to the people of that time. And so, with the taste of that hearty, murky ale still a pleasant memory on your tongue, the lingering warmth in your belly, a small comfort against the evening chill, it would eventually come time to settle your dues. No tapping a card here, no digital beep. You'd reach into a pouch, perhaps leather, perhaps rough-spun wool, feeling for the familiar, irregular shapes of your coins. These weren't the neat, identical discs we know today. Oh no, you might have a silver penny, thin and perhaps a little clipped at the edges. A common, if dishonest, practice to shave off a sliver of precious metal, or maybe a groat, if you were feeling particularly flush. The tavern keeper, their eyes sharp despite the dim light from the tallow candles or the flickering hearth, would take them from your calloused palm. You'd hear the distinct metallic chink as they dropped onto the worn wooden counter, or perhaps into a specific earthenware dish kept for the purpose. Each coin would be carefully inspected. They might weigh it in their hand, their thumb rubbing over the worn face of some long-dead king, feeling for the correct heft, the expected density. Some innkeepers, particularly canny ones, might even bite down softly on a silver piece to test its purity, a faint indentation the only proof of their quick, practical assay. It was a small, quiet ritual of trust and verification, a necessary dance in a world where currency could be as variable as the weather, and a clipped coin could mean a tiny loss in a business of tiny margins. And the price of that ale? It wasn't always just the whim of the host. Often, local authorities, the town bailiff or a specially designated ale conner, set the price for a gallon of ale or checked its quality. This was meant to protect the common folk from being gouged, ensuring that this essential source of calories and cheer remained accessible and unadulterated. A small measure of fairness, perhaps, in a world that wasn't always so. It's a comforting thought in a way that even then, someone was trying to keep things just a little bit honest, at least when it came to the price of a good brew. And once that ale, honestly priced and hopefully well brewed, begins to settle, a familiar rumble might start deep in your belly. The need for something solid, something to anchor the spirit as much as the stomach. Food, then. But don't picture grand platters of roasted pheasant or intricately spiced delicacies here in your average smoky wayside tavern. Oh no, the fare available is generally as unpretentious as the rough-hewn wooden tables. You'd most likely be offered a bowl of pottage, the ever-present cornerstone of medieval sustenance. Imagine a thick, slowly simmering stew, often bubbling away in a communal pot for much of the day. It's a hearty concoction of whatever grains and root vegetables were readily available, perhaps oats or barley, mingling with peas, beans, onions, or wilted greens pulled from a nearby patch. If you were particularly fortunate, a stray piece of bacon rind or a sliver of long-stewed anonymous meat might surface from its murky depths, a tiny, savory treasure in what was often a largely vegetable world. The smell would be earthy, robust, filling the air with a promise of simple warmth, if not exactly culinary adventure. Alongside this, a substantial hunk of bread, dense and dark, probably made from rye or barley flour rather than fine wheat. Not the soft, airy loaves we know, but something with real heft, its crust satisfyingly chewy, perfect for mopping up every last smear of that pottage. Perhaps there'd be a wedge of strong local cheese, sharp and crumbly on the tongue, or a few slices of salted, preserved meat, leathery and intensely savory, food designed for longevity as much as for taste. It was fuel, plain and simple, designed to see a weary traveler through to the next dawn, or a laborer through another long day of toil. Nothing more, nothing less, just the honest, humble sustenance of a bygone age. But sometimes, if the tavern was more than just a place for ale and a cold crust, if there was a fire truly roaring in the hearth for cooking, then the air would carry other stories. Imagine, for a moment, the scent of a perpetually simmering pottage, a stew that never quite ended but was always being added to. Root vegetables, perhaps some barley, maybe a forgotten scrap of bacon or a bony piece of chicken, all melding together over hours, days even. The aroma would be earthy, a little bit greasy, a constant savory background note to the tavern's hum, a promise of warmth, however humble. And if you were truly fortunate, that stew might be accompanied by the almost sacred smell of baking bread. Not the airy, bleached loaves of our time, but something dense, perhaps with rye or whole grains, its crust forming slowly in a stone oven or even nestled in the embers. That particular fragrance, warm, yeasty, and deeply comforting, would have been a welcome counterpoint to the more common smells of stale ale, damp wool, and unwashed bodies that often lingered in such places. It was the scent of civilization, however rustic, a small comfort in a harsh world. On a truly special occasion, or in a more prosperous establishment, another scent might dominate the unmistakable, mouth-watering aroma of roasting meat. Perhaps a spit-turned capon, its skin crisping and dripping fat into the flames below, or a joint of venison if the tavern keeper had connections, or perhaps a poacher's quiet disregard for forest laws. This smell, rich and indulgent, would cut through everything else. A clear signal of temporary abundance. A rare treat in a world where meat was often a luxury, not a daily expectation. These cooking smells, from the humble pottage to the aspirational roast, wove themselves into the very fabric of the tavern, a complex and occasionally delicious tapestry for the nose, mingling with wood smoke and humanity. But beneath those enticing, often fleeting aromas of roasting meats, another scent would almost certainly underpin the tavern's olfactory landscape, the honest, earthy fragrance of bread. Not the light, fluffy loaves we might picture, but something far more substantial. Imagine a hunk of dark, coarse bread set before you on the rough-hewn table. It's dense, perhaps a little damp from its journey from a local baker, or even baked in the tavern's own ovens if it's a larger establishment, its warmth radiating faintly into the cool air. The crust would be thick, almost leathery, a deep brown that speaks of long baking and whole grains, maybe rye or barley mixed with the precious wheat. Breaking it open wouldn't release a cloud of fragrant steam, but reveal a tight, chewy crumb, its color a muted tan or even a somber gray. You might feel the slight, almost imperceptible grittiness of the stone-ground flour between your fingers, a tiny, tangible reminder of its humble origins and the labor involved in its creation. This wasn't merely an accompaniment, this was often the meal itself, or a significant filling part of it. A pewter tankard of ale, cool and cloudy, perhaps a little flat by modern standards, would be its natural companion. You'd tear off a piece of this sturdy bread, its texture almost demanding a good soak. And soak it you would, either in the ale itself for a quick, slightly bitter mouthful, or, more satisfyingly, using it as an edible spoon to mop up the last remnants of that thick, savory pottage we spoke of earlier, the gravy staining the bread a deeper hue, making it heavy and rich. This was the true staff of life, the reliable foundation upon which daily existence was built, far more constant and dependable than the occasional promise of a spit-turned capon. That pottage. Let's settle into the thought of it now, shall we? Picture a humble wooden bowl, perhaps a little rough-hewn, but warm in your hands, cradling a thick, steaming stew. This wasn't some delicate, clear broth. Pottage was the very essence of sustenance, a hearty, often gloopy mix of whatever grains were on hand. Sturdy barley, perhaps some oats, or even rye, simmered slowly, patiently, with vegetables pulled straight from the damp earth. Imagine the soft surrender of leeks and onions, the occasional sweet interruption of parsnips or carrots, all depending on the whims of the season and the luck of the harvest. Their colors would meld into an earthy, comforting tapestry, sometimes a muted green, other times a soft, wholesome brown, bubbling gently. The aroma curling up from the bowl would be simple, yet deeply, almost profoundly satisfying. Not a complex perfume of distant, costly spices, but fragrant, with the honest, grounding scent of cooked root vegetables, leafy greens, and those softened grains, perhaps with just a whisper of wild herbs like thyme, or a scattering of parsley, grown in a small, hopeful patch near the kitchen. If fortune smiled upon you, or your purse was a little heavier, then small precious scraps of salted pork, or perhaps some flaked river fish, might have found their way into the common pot, lending a richer depth and a more substantial savory memory. But often it was purely of the earth, its goodness derived from the long, slow cooking that tenderly coaxed out every last bit of flavor from its unpretentious ingredients. Spoonful by spoonful, it was filling this pottage, a slow, steady release of warmth and energy for the hours ahead, a comfort that was, thankfully, almost always within reach in a world of uncertainties. But the humble pottage wasn't the only sustenance to be found, especially if your day had been long and your need for something more substantial gnawed at you. Perhaps then, a chunk of hard cheese would make its appearance on your rough wooden trencher. Imagine its pale, waxy surface, or perhaps a more crumbly, aged texture, giving off a strong, almost sharp savory aroma that cut through the general fug of the tavern. Each bite would be dense, salty, and satisfying, a slow release of flavor that lingered, a testament to milk transformed and preserved. This was a food built to last, a reliable friend in a world without chilled larders. Or, for a different kind of hearty fare, there might be salted or smoked fish, its skin perhaps still bearing the silvery sheen of the river or the darker, oilier toughness of the sea. Flaked onto a piece of coarse bread, its intense saltiness or the deep, resinous tang of wood smoke would be a powerful counterpoint to a milder ale. Smoked meats, too, dark and glistening, hung with the promise of a chewy, enduring satisfaction. These weren't delicate morsels. They were foods of necessity, their robust flavors and enduring qualities, a direct result of the need to keep hunger at bay for days or even weeks, without the benefit of cool storage. They offered a dense, reliable energy, a compact parcel of survival for the weary traveler or the laborer facing another dawn of hard work. So you've got your hunk of that smoky meat, your dense, perhaps slightly coarse bread. How do you approach it? Don't expect a neatly laid out set of silver, gleaming under the candlelight. No, your primary tools are the ones you were born with. Your hands. You'd tear at the bread, feeling its rough texture, grip the meat firmly. A personal knife, tucked securely into your belt, would be your most trusted utensil. This wasn't just for fending off trouble on a dark path. It was essential here for slicing off manageable chunks from tougher cuts of meat, or dividing a shared portion of hard cheese. This knife was yours. Its wooden or bone handle likely worn smooth, shaped by your own grip over countless meals and tasks. If a steaming pottage arrived, a thick, bubbling stew of root vegetables, grains, and perhaps a few precious scraps of meat, you might be offered a spoon. Likely wooden, well used, and perhaps stained from countless prior meals, or sometimes fashioned from horn. Simple and functional, but the idea of your own personal spoon, let alone a fork, that was a luxury far off in the future for most ordinary folk. Often these spoons, much like the communal drinking jacks or the rough-hewn wooden bowls, might be shared. Rinsed in a bucket of water if you were lucky, or perhaps just wiped on a piece of available cloth, or even your sleeve before the next hungry person took their turn. It's a different world of closeness, isn't it? A raw, unvarnished intimacy, where the boundaries of personal space and, well, what we now understand about germs were drawn in very different, much looser lines. Beyond the clatter of those shared spoons and the scrape of benches, the true soundtrack of the medieval tavern begins to envelop you. It's not music, not usually, unless a traveling minstrel has wandered in, hoping for a few coins or a cup of ale. No, the dominant sound is a constant, rolling murmur of human voices. Imagine it, a thick, comforting blanket of sound, woven from dozens of conversations, some earnest, some jovial, all blending together. It's the sound of community, a little rough around the edges perhaps, but undeniably present. This gentle hum is the tavern's heartbeat, punctuated by sudden bursts of unrestrained laughter, sharp and clear, or the occasional swell of raised voices. Perhaps a disagreement over a game of dice, or an emphatic point being made about the price of wool. But mostly, it's a steady flow. Here, in the fug of wood smoke and spilled ale, news travels faster than any royal messenger. Stories are currency. Passed from traveler to local, from farmer to merchant, each tale embellished a little more with every telling. You might hear of distant battles, of strange omens, or simply the latest village gossip, all shared freely in the dim, flickering light. It's a place where words, like the ale, flow without filter, painting a picture of a world both vast and intimately connected, one whispered story at a time. And as one story ends, another often begins, picked up by a different voice in another corner of the crowded room. Listen closely now. Past the clatter of wooden tankards and the low, insistent hum of more private arguments, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and something vaguely like old cheese, someone, perhaps a grizzled man with eyes that have seen too many hard winters and roads, clears his throat with a rasp. He might speak of the king's new tax, a collective grumble rippling through his listeners like a wave. Or perhaps it's a merchant, newly arrived, his cloak still heavy with the scent of rain and pine from the forest track. bringing news of a bountiful harvest 2 shires over, or, less happily, of restless bandits plaguing the northern roads. These aren't official pronouncements, carefully inscribed onto expensive parchment by a clerk's meticulous hand, sealed with wax and authority. No, this is living news, breathed out with the scent of ale and the lingering ghost of pipe smoke, often embellished with each retelling, sometimes wildly inaccurate, but utterly vital all the same. Then there are the other tales, spun not from recent events but from the deeper, darker well of memory and shared imagination. A hushed voice, leaning in conspiratorially, might recount the eerie tale of the spectral hounds heard howling on the moors, their cries a chilling omen. Another, emboldened by drink, might sing a verse of a ballad centuries old, of heroic deeds and tragic love, or perhaps a more ribald, earthy tale that brings a flush to the cheeks of the serving maid. These stories, repeated and reshaped, are the very sinew of local culture, binding the community together with shared fears, whispered hopes, and the occasional burst of rough laughter. In a world where few could read, the tavern storyteller was the historian, the news anchor, and the entertainer, all rolled into one, his words painting vivid pictures in the flickering firelight for anyone willing to lend an ear. Beyond the storyteller's corner, other pockets of activity would draw your eye, little eddies of human interaction in the tavern's gentle current. You might see a small group huddled, their faces illuminated by a single tallow candle, casting long, dancing shadows on the wattle and daub walls. The clatter of dice, perhaps carved from bone, a material readily available, a memento of some past meal or hunt, would be a familiar, rhythmic sound. These weren't the perfect smooth cubes we might imagine, but something more rustic, more organic, each throw carrying its own unique, slightly unpredictable tumble. Elsewhere, a pair might be bent over a rough-hewn tabletop, where a game of 9 men's Morris, or perhaps Merrill's, is deeply scratched directly into the wood. Centuries of such games had etched these patterns into tavern furniture across the land. Fingers, calloused from a lifetime of labor, would carefully move their simple counters. Perhaps well-worn pebbles, dried beans, or even little scraps of leather across the familiar lines. Small wagers, a few copper coins glinting faintly in the dim light, would often change hands, adding a quiet thrill to the proceedings. Nothing extravagant, usually just enough to make the game interesting, to lend a little weight to each move, each thoughtful placement or capture. The air, already thick with the scent of spilled ale and wood smoke, might carry the low murmur of their hushed bets, the occasional grunt of frustration or a soft, knowing chuckle of victory. These weren't just idle pastimes. They were small dramas playing out in the amber glow, a brief, shared escape from the day's endless toil. And just as those small dramas of dice and cards played out, another kind of theater might unfold, unannounced. If fortune smiled, not just on the gamblers but on everyone huddled within those smoky walls, the heavy door might creak open to admit a new sound, a new presence. A traveling minstrel, perhaps road-weary and cloaked against the chill, would step into the relative warmth. You might see them scan the room, their eyes accustomed to the dim light of countless such places, before finding a spot to settle, their instrument held with familiar care. Then, after a moment of quiet anticipation, or perhaps with a sudden cheerful flourish that belied their weariness, the music would begin. It could be the sweet, almost mournful plucking of a lute, each note a tiny, glittering jewel cast into the thick, hazy air, or the reedy, lively call of a pipe, a tune that skipped and danced, perhaps coaxing a rare smile from a deeply lined, tired face. Sometimes it was the merry, sawing song of a fiddle, its strings vibrating with an earthy energy that seemed to briefly chase away the deepest shadows and the lingering scent of damp wool and stale beer. This sudden burst of melody, however simple, would gently cut through the tavern's usual hum, a welcome, living distraction. For a few precious moments, the weight of the world, the ache in weary bones, might feel a little lighter. In return for this fleeting gift of sound, a few copper coins, hard-earned and carefully spared, would clink softly into an outstretched cap, or a tankard of ale, freshly drawn and cool, would be passed along. a humble exchange for a song that briefly filled not just the silence, but perhaps a little corner of the soul. But the lone minstrel's tune, however sweet, was often just a prelude. As the evening deepened, and the ale continued its steady, warming journey through the veins of the tavern's patrons, a different kind of music would begin to stir. It wasn't coaxed by coin, but by camaraderie and the courage found at the bottom of a tankard, a shared desire to lighten the load of a long day or a hard life. Perhaps one voice, louder and bolder than the rest, would bellow out the first line of a familiar rowdy refrain. A song about a brave knight, a foolish peasant, or more likely, the simple joys and sorrows of everyday life, its verses known by heart across the room. Then another voice would join, then a third, rough and wonderfully off-key, but full of spirit, until the very timbers of the tavern seemed to hum with the chorus, a wave of sound washing over everyone. Imagine the scene, shadows dancing on the smoky walls from the flickering rushlights and the central hearth. Faces, ruddy in the fire's glow, creased with laughter or earnest concentration as they tried to recall the next verse, some leaning into their neighbors, sharing a knowing glance. The air, already thick with the scent of wood smoke, damp wool, and spilled beer, would now thrum with the vibration of dozens of voices, the rhythmic thud of tankards on wooden tables, perhaps even the stamp of a heavy boot, keeping time on the grimy floor. This wasn't a performance for an audience, it was a collective release, a moment where the harsh lines of social standing might blur just a little, washed away by ale and melody. For in these shared songs, often bawdy, sometimes surprisingly mournful but always heartfelt, a potent sense of belonging was forged in the dim, flickering light. It was a brief, boisterous, beautiful chaos, a vital thread in the rough fabric of medieval life, reminding everyone that even in the darkest of times, there was still room for a song, sung together. But the very same ale that loosens tongues for song can also sharpen them for dispute. As the evening wears on, and the flagons are refilled time and again, the general hubbub might curdle in one corner, like milk left too long in the sun. A muttered insult, perhaps over a misplaced wager from a game of knucklebones, or a perceived slight to someone's dubious honor, begins as a low rumble, almost indistinguishable from the tavern's usual symphony of noise. Then a voice, tight with accusation, cuts through the merriment like a cold draft. Another answers, louder, more belligerent, spit flying with the force of the words. The scrape of a stool on the rough, dirt-strewn floor. A heavy pewter tankard slammed down, making the sticky, ale-stained tables vibrate. This is the moment the tavern keeper, a figure often as stout as the oak barrels in his cellar, and with a face etched by countless such nights, steps in. He's seen it all before, 1,000 times. The flushed faces, the pointing fingers, the way a disagreement can ignite like dry tinder. His livelihood depends on a certain level of controlled revelry, not outright brawls that splinter his precious, hard-won furniture or drive away other paying customers. With a voice that could out-bellow a market bull, or perhaps just a weary sigh and a firm, calloused hand gripping a shoulder, he'd move to separate the would-be combatants. Sometimes a sharp, no-nonsense word was enough. Other times, a more forceful ejection into the cool, indifferent night air was the only remedy. The brief, ugly tear in the tavern's boisterous fabric would then be hastily patched, the interrupted conversations resuming, though perhaps with a little less joyous abandon than before, a subtle wariness lingering in the smoky air. But not all disturbances were so dramatic, so full of flying fists and furious words. Often, the ale, potent and plentiful, simply did its quiet, steady work, unwinding the tight coils of a long day, sometimes a little too thoroughly. If you were to let your gaze drift around the smoky room, past the more animated clusters of drinkers, you'd soon spot its more subdued effects, etched on various faces, in various postures. There, a man, perhaps a carter whose day was spent wrestling with stubborn mules, might be attempting a song. His voice, usually strong, now a quavering, slurred melody, the words muddled and lost in a fog of drink. His companions, equally flushed and loose-limbed, might roar their approval with unsteady voices, or simply grin foolishly, lost in their own hazy conversations that loop and wander like a drunkard's path. Someone else might be gesticulating wildly, telling a story with grand, clumsy movements that threatened to send their tankard flying across the already stained floorboards. And then there were those further along that well-trodden path to oblivion. Tucked into a shadowy corner, you might spot a figure slumped heavily against a rough-hewn wall, chin on chest, a gentle, gurgling snore escaping their lips, a temporary, uncomplaining resident of the tavern's floor. Or perhaps another soul, head pillowed on their arms atop a sticky, ale-ringed table, a small puddle forming beside their cheek. This wasn't cause for particular alarm or shame, not really. It was just an evening. The innkeeper, ever pragmatic, would likely step over them, or perhaps gently nudge them further out of the main thoroughfare if they were truly in the way. Their slumber, an accepted, almost inevitable, part of the tavern's nightly rhythm. And as these weary souls found their brief oblivion, the tavern around them pulsed with a different kind of life. It was far more than just a place to dull the senses or find a rough night's lodging. For many, this dimly lit, smoke-hazy room, thick with the scent of damp wool, stale ale, and wood smoke, was the very heart of their world, a vital organ pumping news and rumor through the community's veins. It was where the threads of countless lives briefly, and often loudly, intertwined. Dot. Listen closely, past the rhythmic snores and the occasional cough, and you might discern the murmur of a deal being struck in a shadowed corner, a hushed secret shared between tightly huddled figures, or perhaps the more boisterous retelling of a traveler's tale, each word eagerly absorbed by the listeners. Here, snippets of news from the next village, or even fantastical stories from distant lands. Tales of harvests good and bad, of skirmishes on far-off borders, of the comings and goings of lords and bishops, would ripple outwards. In a world where literacy was a rare gift and printed news non-existent, the tavern was the bulletin board, the gossip column, the live broadcast, all rolled into one boisterous, beer-soaked package. And it was an escape, wasn't it? A precious, if fleeting, refuge from the biting wind that whistled through the ill-fitting shutters, from the damp chill of a poorly thatched hut, or the relentless, back-breaking drudgery of the fields. For a few carefully hoarded pennies, you could purchase a measure of warmth from the central hearth, the illusion of camaraderie in a crowded room, and a brief forgetting of the aches in your bones and the gnawing worry in your belly. The flickering rushlights or tallow candles cast dancing shadows, softening the hard edges of reality, if only for a little while, allowing a shared glance, a raised cup, a moment of collective laughter, small, essential comforts that help stitch together the fabric of daily existence. As the evening deepens and the rushlights burn lower, casting longer, more introspective shadows, the character of the tavern begins a slow, almost imperceptible shift. The initial boisterous energy, fueled by the day's release and the shared warmth of the hearth, starts to ebb for some. You might see a craftsman, his hands still aching from the day's meticulous work, drain the last dregs from his wooden cup, his gaze already distant, fixed on the early start awaiting him. Perhaps his wife, beside him, begins to gather a small bundle, her movements signaling the journey back to a cramped, cold cottage. A quiet word, a scraping of a heavy bench on the uneven, dirt-packed floor, and they are gone, absorbed into the inky blackness and the uncertain footing of the path outside. But not everyone departs with the fading light. Others, perhaps those with fewer pressing duties come sunrise, or maybe with more pressing reasons to linger in the dim comfort, sink deeper into their seats. The wooden benches, already worn smooth and slightly sticky from countless evenings like this, seem to hold them fast. Conversations might become more hushed, words shared like secrets in the gloom, or, in another corner, a small cluster of companions might find a defiant surge of late-night energy. Their laughter, then, is a little louder, a little more hollow, perhaps, against the deepening quiet that presses in from the world beyond the tavern's roughly hewn door. The air grows heavier, thick with the lingering scent of stale ale, wood smoke that makes your eyes water just a touch, and the faint, earthy smell of damp wool and unwashed bodies. It's a different quality of solace now, more subdued, tinged with a weary resignation, as the true, deep night finally claims the world outside. The great stone hearth, once roaring with boisterous life and crackling energy, now breathes only in soft orange sighs, its generous heat slowly retreating from the wider room. Its embers glow like a slumbering beast's eyes, a warm, pulsating heart in the cooling space, but their light no longer pushes back the encroaching darkness with such cheerful confidence. You might find yourself watching, mesmerized, as a half-burnt log crumbles silently into a shower of faint golden sparks, a brief, silent firework against the deepening gloom. The few remaining tallow candles, perhaps perched precariously on a deeply scarred wooden table or tucked into a smoky niche in the wall, begin their final, sputtering, almost mournful performance. Their flames dance and dip, casting your own shadow and those of the few other stubborn lingerers into elongated, wavering giants that writhe and twist across the rough-cast, lime-washed walls. Each stuttering flicker seems to deepen the surrounding obscurity, transforming familiar, mundane shapes. A discarded tankard, a slumped figure, a hanging piece of dried herb, into something a little more mysterious, perhaps even a little unsettling. The corners of the room, always dim and home to cobwebs thick as shrouds, now seem to hold untold secrets, woven into the very fabric of the night itself. Listen closely, and you might hear the occasional soft pop and crackle from the hearth as the last of the wood surrenders, or the rhythmic, almost meditative drip of a candle consuming itself, its hot wax pooling like a miniature pale shimmering lake upon the wood. The boisterous, often chaotic chorus of the evening has long since faded, replaced by the almost inaudible murmur of a solitary determined drinker, or perhaps just the lonely sigh of the wind as it whispers its ancient secrets through unseen cracks in the heavy bolted door and the ancient stonework. This is the tavern in its most intimate, most contemplative hour, when the world outside is utterly lost to the deep, dark, starless velvet of a truly medieval night. But even this profound stillness holds a secret signal, a subtle shift in the tavern's tired breathing. The innkeeper, perhaps unseen until now, materializes from the deeper shadows near the hearth, no longer a silent observer but a gentle, weary usher towards the door. A deliberate, almost ritualistic clearing of a few stray pewter tankards, their dull gleam briefly catching the candlelight, or a pointed snuffing of a sputtering tallow candle on a distant scarred table. These are the quiet pronouncements that the sanctuary is soon to close its wooden arms for the night. Now the last few lingerers begin to stir, a slow unfurling from hunched positions. You might hear the rustle of damp wool as a cloak is drawn tighter, the scrape of a heavy wooden stool pushed back against the uneven, trodden earth or rough-hewn floor. This is the moment of reckoning, not in some grand, dramatic sense, but the simple, earthy accounting for the evening's comforts. The ale, the bread, perhaps a sliver of cheese if you were fortunate. Imagine yourself fumbling in a small, worn leather pouch, the cool, irregular shapes of hammered silver or copper coins passing through your chilled fingers. The clinking, though muted in the otherwise still room, cuts through the quiet, each coin a tiny, metallic punctuation mark to a shared evening. Voices, now hushed and thick with sleep or drink, might rise slightly in brief negotiation or mumbled agreement with the host, a final, low murmur before the tired goodbyes are exchanged, heavy with the day's fading warmth. Then the heavy oak door groans open one last time, a brief, chilling invitation from that inky, silent world outside, before it's barred shut with a dull thud, sealing the tavern's stories and smoky scents within, until the distant promise of dawn. That dull thud of the heavy bar slotting into place echoes softly in your mind, a sound that has sealed the tavern's smoky warmth and its weary tale securely within these four walls. For those bedding down on benches or floors, it's a signal to surrender to the night. But for you, perhaps, it's a different kind of punctuation, the final, gentle nudge. The ale sits like a pleasant, glowing coal in your belly, and the close, humid air of the room, thick with the lingering ghosts of today's laughter, yesterday's spilled drink, and 100 years of humanity, now begins to feel a little heavy, a comforting blanket grown a touch too warm, too close. Slowly you begin to stir, to gather your few belongings. Your fingers might brush against the familiar coarse weave of a woolen cloak, still carrying the faint, earthy perfume of the lanolin and the distant memory of wood smoke from the central hearth. You might reach for a small, worn leather pouch, its drawstring softened by use, the few coins inside whispering a tiny, metallic secret as you secure it. The warmth of the room clings to you like a drowsy friend, a gentle inertia you're reluctant to entirely shrug off, a sensation as thick and sweet as honey. And yet, the thought of the cool night air, a sharp, clean caress against your skin, begins to beckon with an insistent pull. Imagine that first breath outside, a sudden, cleansing draft after the dense, human-scented fug of the tavern. The night, though profoundly dark and perhaps holding its own unseen mysteries, promises a certain pristine freshness, a vastness that the crowded, smoky confines simply cannot hold. It whispers of clearing your head, of washing away the last vestiges of drowsiness and the fading echoes of the evening's shared clamor. This anticipation is a cool, clean stream, flowing through the warm stuffiness of your mind, a silent invitation to exchange the close comfort for the crisp, waiting unknown. You accept that silent invitation. Reaching out, your hand finds the rough-hewn timber of the door, its surface perhaps still faintly warm from the press of bodies or sticky from spilled drinks. It groans, a low, wooden sigh of reluctance as you push it outward, stepping across the threshold into the waiting unknown. The change is immediate, a physical shock. A wave of cool, almost crisp air washes over your face and exposed skin, a stark contrast to the dense, human-scented fug you've just departed. It feels cleansing, this night air, carrying the clean scent of damp earth, the mineral tang of cold stone, and perhaps the distant, ghostly aroma of wood smoke from dying embers across the sleeping town. The boisterous, swirling chaos of sound from the tavern, the laughter, the arguments, the off-key singing, it snaps shut behind you, muffled instantly, as if a heavy woolen blanket has been dropped. Suddenly, the world is profoundly quiet. The loudest sounds now might be the whisper of a breeze you couldn't feel inside, nudging the creaking tavern sign above your head, or the crunch of your own boots on the unseen path, perhaps packed dirt or uneven, dew-slicked cobbles. Your eyes, accustomed to the flickering, smoky dance of rushlights and the glow from the hearth, now strain to penetrate a darkness so complete it feels almost tangible. This isn't merely dim. It's an inky, enveloping blackness, where shapes are only hinted at, and the path ahead is a matter of memory and cautious faith. The sky above, if clouds permit, offers a scattering of remote, indifferent stars. Perhaps a sliver of moon, pale and thin, offers its meager assistance, casting long, distorted shadows that dance with every gust of wind. More likely, though, the clouds have drawn a thick, woolen blanket across the heavens, and the darkness is absolute. If you are fortunate, truly fortunate, you might carry a lantern, a small, flickering beacon of tallow or oil, its horn panes diffusing a weak, yellowed glow that barely pushes back the oppressive night. This precious light illuminates perhaps a few feet ahead, a small, wavering circle on the treacherous ground, just enough to pick out the worst of the ruts, the protruding stones, or the unexpected slick patch of something best left unidentified. Each step is a careful negotiation. You feel your way more than see it, your feet learning the subtle dips and rises of the path. The air, cooler now, might carry the faint, damp smell of wet earth, or the less pleasant aroma of a nearby midden heap, a gentle reminder of the day's accumulated waste, now still and undisturbed. The raucous laughter and music of the tavern are fading behind you, replaced by a different soundscape. The sigh of the wind through unseen eaves, the distant bark of a dog, or perhaps the sudden, unnerving scurry of a rat in the shadows. Your own breath, your own heartbeat, suddenly seems much louder in this profound stillness. There's a quiet tension in such a walk, a primal awareness of your surroundings. It's a journey not just through space, but through a different kind of time. A time when the night truly belonged to the unknown, holding its secrets close. You might clutch your cloak tighter, not just against the chill, but against the unseen possibilities that lurk just beyond your small bubble of light. Every shadowed doorway, every narrow alleyway holds a breath of mystery, perhaps a hint of danger, or perhaps just the quiet slumber of a city at rest. It's a slow, deliberate progress, a world away from the hurried pace of our own well-lit nights. The rough wooden door of the tavern creaks shut behind you, a dull thud that momentarily punctuates the night. Immediately, the cacophony, the vibrant hum of life you were just immersed in, begins to recede. That boisterous, slightly off-key song, which a moment ago filled your ears, now sounds muffled, a distant, fading echo. The clatter of wooden cups on rough-hewn tables, the sudden bursts of gruff laughter, they all start to soften, blending into a receding murmur that the night air gently carries away. You draw your cloak a little tighter, the cool breath of the evening a sharp, clean contrast to the dense fog of humanity and wood smoke you've just stepped out from. The lingering scent of stale ale, of damp wool, and perhaps something vaguely, unpleasantly organic still clings faintly to your clothes, a subtle souvenir of the close quarters. As you walk further, the tavern's dim, flickering light, that beacon of warmth and sociability, shrinks to just another indistinct smudge against the deeper, velvety darkness of the street. Your mind replays a few quiet images from within. The leathery, weather-beaten face of the old man who shared a brief, knowing glance. The quick, tired smile of the serving maid. The sheer, unapologetic volume of it all. It was a place of simple, earthy pleasures. A brief, smoky refuge from the often brutal realities of the day. But also, let's be candid, a place of inherent discomfort. The hard, unforgiving benches, the ever-present grime, the floor sticky underfoot. Each soft footfall on the uneven path takes you further into the quiet. The individual sounds of the tavern are now completely swallowed by the vast, enveloping silence of the medieval night. Only the subtle rustle of your own movement remains, a solitary rhythm in the profound darkness. It makes you ponder, doesn't it? The fleeting nature of those moments of communal warmth, snatched amidst a life that was so often anything but comfortable, anything but easy. Indeed, those moments were fleeting, like sparks from the tavern's own hearth, briefly bright against the vast, unyielding darkness of the medieval world. And perhaps that's precisely why they were so fiercely sought, so deeply cherished. For many, stepping across the threshold of that alehouse was more than just seeking a drink. It was an act of escape, a brief armistice in the daily battle for survival, a simple human need for a moment's peace. Imagine, if you will, the biting wind you've endured all day, the gnawing ache of an empty stomach, the chill that seeps into your very bones from damp clothes and even damper spirits. Then, you push open that heavy wooden door. The first sensation is warmth, a thick, almost tangible wave rolling out to greet you, carrying the scent of wood smoke, Swedish malt from spilled ale, and perhaps something vaguely savory, a pottage simmering slowly over the flames. It's a perfume of temporary salvation and olfactory embrace. Your ears, perhaps long accustomed to the lonely whistle of the wind through sparse trees or the stark silence of an empty field, are suddenly filled with a comforting, if raucous, din, the low hum of many conversations blending together, a sudden burst of unrestrained laughter, the rhythmic thud of a wooden tankard on a deeply scarred table. Here, amidst the dim, flickering light of tallow candles or the ruddy glow of the fire, you weren't just another anonymous soul facing the hardships of the day alone. You were, for a while, part of a fleeting community, sharing stories, complaints, or simply the silent comfort of shared human presence. And the ale, rough and cloudy as it so often was, served from a communal jug or a battered pewter cup, offered not just solace but vital calories. It was a liquid warmth that spread through tired limbs, often accompanied by a hunk of coarse, dark bread. Simple fare, to be sure, but a welcome bulwark against the ever-present specter of hunger. This wasn't a grand hall or a place of refined comforts, far from it. But in its very earthiness, its robust, unpretentious embrace, the medieval tavern offered a crucial sanctuary, a place where, for a few precious hours, the harsh realities outside could be held at bay by the glow of the fire, the taste of ale, and the fellowship of others. A small, flickering light indeed, but one that made the overwhelming darkness just a little more bearable. Indeed, that flickering light, however small, cast revealing shadows on the microcosm within. The tavern, you see, wasn't just a building. It was a miniature stage where the grand, often messy play of medieval life was performed nightly. Observe the seating, if you can call it that. The rough-hewn benches closest to the fire, often occupied by those with a few more coins to their name, or perhaps those whose reputations afforded them a sliver of deference. Further back, in the gloomier, colder corners, huddled figures with less to spend, their conversations more muted, their presence less acknowledged. A subtle, unspoken hierarchy, just like the rigid social ladders that define the world outside its mud and wattle walls. A quiet, constant reminder of one's place. The joys here were undeniably earthy, almost primal. The warmth of the ale, often weak and cloudy by our standards, perhaps tasting faintly of the barrel it was brewed in, but a comfort nonetheless. The roar of a shared song, however off-key, a brief, communal release from the day's relentless toil and the ache in weary limbs. Perhaps the satisfying thud of dice on a worn wooden table, splintered and stained from countless previous games, a fleeting chance at fortune, however small. These were the simple pleasures, snatched from a life that often offered little else in the way of luxury or respite. And beneath it all, the ever-present hum of challenge, the fear of a brawl erupting over a spilled drink or a perceived slight, the gnawing worry about the cost of that next cup, the awareness that outside these walls, hardship, disease, and the arbitrary whims of fate waited patiently. This little haven, in its own boisterous, smoky way, held up a surprisingly clear mirror to the soul of its age. So as your mind begins to quieten, and the edges of your day soften and fade, let your thoughts drift back to that medieval gathering place, that hub of flickering light and human sound. For all its raw edges, its smoke-stained timbers that had absorbed countless whispered secrets and boisterous declarations, and the sometimes unpredictable company it kept, it was so much more than just a building. It was an idea, a fundamental human concept, taking root in the often harsh soil of the era. Perhaps, even now, you can almost feel the unyielding texture of a rough wooden bench beneath you, sense the faint, intermittent warmth radiating from a distant, struggling hearth, the air thick with the smell of damp wool, spilled ale, and wood smoke. The murmur of voices, rising and falling like a tide, becomes a comforting, indistinct hum, a human lullaby. Consider, as you settle deeper into your own quiet space, how this very establishment, with its cloudy ale and its earnest arguments, its fleeting friendships forged over a shared cup, and its collectively shouldered anxieties, is a direct ancestor to the familiar pubs and welcoming inns we know today. The names might have been polished over centuries, the beer might flow clearer and colder, the lighting certainly far less reliant on sputtering tallow, but the core purpose that remains remarkably, almost stubbornly, constant. It's a testament to a timeless human need, a quiet, persistent yearning for a shared space, a place for refreshment, certainly, for a brief respite from labor or travel, but more profoundly, for community, for the simple yet deeply vital comfort of not being entirely alone with one's thoughts or the day's accumulated burdens. These medieval walls, however rough-hewn and drafty, were early custodians of that fundamental desire to connect, to share, to simply be together. Thank you for joining us on Restful Historian. Until our next story, may your thoughts be calm and your rest deep.